First of all, as usual, our motivations of the utmost importance. To establish all sentient beings, not a single one excluded, in the awakening of Buddhahood. With that end in mind, we are here to listen to Dharma instructions, to Dharma teachings. So with that attitude, we should then correspondingly proceed to listen to Rinpoche's explanations. So in our last teaching we have heard how what is known as the five skandhas, or the five accumulations, how they are in their purified form none other but the five Buddhas, or how they transform into the five Buddhas once we bring about purification through various methods. Now KARMAPA goes on to say in the same text that the five elements are correspondingly the five consorts, the eight consciousnesses are the eight bodhisattvas, etc. So accordingly, our bodies are made up out of the five elements, which are earth, water, fire, wind, and space. And which begins with the space element. Within our body, here and there are certain hollow spaces which correspond to the space element. And these hollow spaces in their purified form are none other but the consort of Buddha Vairochana, who is white in color. The consort is also white in color. Her name in Tibetan, Ying Chukma, in Sanskrit, Datrishvari. That would be the purified form of the space element. Then there are all the liquid bits in our body, which of course correspond to the water element. In the impure form, they appear as such as all sorts of liquids within our body, and in the purified form, these liquids would be none other but the consort of the blue Buddha Akshobhya. Her name is Mamaki, and she also appears equally as the Buddha that she's paired with. Then there are all the solid bits within our body, which is the most part of our body, like our flesh, etc., which are none other but the earth element. The earth element in its purified form then is none other but Buddha Lachana, who is the consort of the yellow Buddha Ratnasambhava, and correspondingly she would also appear as yellow in color. Then of course there's the heat element within our body heat for that matter, which in its purified form is none other but the consort of Buddha Amitabha, who is red in color. She also appears red in color. Her Tibetan name is Gökamo, her Sanskrit name continuously eludes me. Literally it means the one with white clothes. And well, that is her, red in color, the purified form of the heat element. And then finally there's the wind element within our body, so the breath, the various airs that move here and there, which manifest as such in their impure form. In the purified form there would be none other but the consort of the green Buddha, Amoghasiddhi, the consort of which also appears in green body color, and her name would then be Samayatara. So generally speaking, our regular setup, so to say, is that of the 5 types of consciousness, and that coupled or paired with our physical setup. So the 5 types of consciousness, the 5 skandhas, as we have heard in their purified form, are none other but the 5 Buddhas, whereas the physical aspects of our body in their pure forms are none other but the 5 female Buddhas, or the consorts of the Buddhas. So in this way, whatever it is that we might look at in that particular regard, essentially there are none other but the 5 types of Buddhas, or 5 kinds of Buddha potential. That has forever been so. That is potentially always the case with us. And therefore, if we were to train ourselves in the meditation techniques of the one or other Yidam practice, we were to habituate ourselves to train in such meditations, we could eventually, through the purifying effect of these practices, behold various aspects in these ways. It could by all means happen that if we continuously purify ourselves through such meditative techniques, that occasionally we would behold face to face the one or other Buddha. We could have a vision or perception of Buddha Vairocana or Buddha Amitabha or any of the other Buddhas for that matter. It could at the same time happen, if we have purified ourselves sufficiently through such practices, that others, on the other hand, would perceive us in the form of the one or other Buddha. In this way, we would continuously purify ourselves until complete awakening, complete achievement of Buddhahood would be brought about, and it also makes sure that, or it also provides us with the ability to continuously manifest for the sake of beings in the one or other form, whatever is appropriate, whatever is beneficial at any particular time for beings, until the circle or the cycle of suffering would be emptied. So once we ourselves have brought about the necessary realizations, we would continue to work for the benefit of others in the one form or other, whichever appropriate, whichever necessary. And that would be the realization of the Nirmanakaya aspect for that.
And then the Gombo Bar or something. KARMAPA Düsum Jamyang, that Gombo Kongrala, young in Saja Chambo Gommi, Tanana, Shoko, Tana, Pepsons. Then the Gombo Kongrala, wrote the Blingus, Gombo Kongrala, Joe. The Kala, the Dot Chambo, Chetty Chambo, Yang. That is like KARMAPA to check a running zero issued. Running that castle. Mangaji take KARMAPA Düsum Gora Anja. Mangaji take Temba Sonji Gorja. Mangaji take Chenrezig Gora Jadua. Oh, that's $10. And not $30.
And indeed, we can read of such events in the life stories of masters of the past. Rinpoche has repeatedly mentioned how Wangpo eventually sent one of his main students, the future first KARMAPA Düsum Chenpa, to go and meditate at the Gampo mountain, which Düsum Chenpa did, and he practiced intensively there for 17, 18 years, when at that time one of his sponsors had erected a large stupa, and he asked Düsum Chenpa to please come to consecrate the stupa. Düsum Chenpa went, and as he consecrated the stupa, some people saw him in his ordinary physical human form as the monk, the Lama Düsum Chenpa. Others, however, saw him in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni, yet others perceived him in the form of the great compassionate one, Avalokiteshvara or Chenrezig.
And the Padoje Tang, Mahamaya Tang, Holo then to Doje Pamutus, Taba, Sherab Yosua. I in that young time, I don't want to be Sherab, Sana talking to the Tadona, Dingy Chamber, I did to go and do some. And then to Rahula and then to Jamo Chenrezig, on the Dharma Tanji. And then to Jamo Chenrezig, Ronnie. Drove do, got Jana, and to the Jambo Chenrezig a Yarsi. True Tongi, Songjuk, a ceremony, Ndela, divine. Take a Songjuk, a ceremony, the gong shows, and Dharma. I did those.
A similar story from the early life of the one who became known as the great protector of beings, Atisha. That was way actually before he became famous. He had studied under various masters, he had received empowerments, and his development process meditation was so well developed, so had become so powerful that at all times he continuously had visions of various awareness deities, of the pure aspects of these deities, such as the Yidam deities Hevajra or Chakasamvara, Mahamaya or Vajrayogini, or Vajravarahi for that matter, etc. When at that time he thought to himself that it would also be a very beneficial thing to train himself in the various meditation techniques of the great compassionate one, Avalokiteshvara, or Chenrezig as he's called in Tibetan. And he went into the presence of one of his early teachers, the Mahasiddha Rahula or Rahula Gupta, and requested these precepts from him. He received these, he trained himself in these practices, and it didn't take long until he beheld a vision of Avalokiteshvara, from whom he then received the instruction that he should continuously train himself in the practice of bodhicitta for the sake of beings, because, as he was told, that is the very essence of all Dharma, that is the very essence of all practice. And as we know from history, he did accordingly.
Sepa me tingling then do the Naranga me Pumbola Jotova. Sepa tree tingling that Naranga Supon and Damso Tandida Jotova, Lasova Tandike, and
So So in this way there are the 5 skandhas, the 5 types of consciousness and the various perceptions associated with these, and then there is the physical aspect of our body, which in its impure state appears as the 5 elements. If we were to train ourselves accordingly and purify all of these, then eventually the imprints, our habituation of perceiving things in this particular way would be exhausted, and we would gain the ability to completely concentrate ourselves in the one or other state. We would eventually, once mind nature, the nature of all appearances and phenomena for that matter, would have been fully recognized, we would stably rest in that recognition, and all appearances and phenomena, including our own perceptions, including our own bodily constituent parts, etc., would be perceived continuously in their pure forms. So there would continuously be the presence of the 5 types of Buddhas, 5 types of female Buddhas, etc. In that particular state, we could simply concentrate in meditative absorption of the type that exhausts all other appearances and phenomena and simply appears in a single form. For instance, there is the exhaustive, we speak of the exhaustive meditative concentration or samadhi of fire. If we were to immerse ourselves in that, then our body would, for all intents and purposes, outwardly appear as a mass, as a ball of fire. Or if we should concentrate on the water element, it would appear as a body of water, etc. Further, Jamyang explains in the same line in which he mentions the 5 elements as being the 5 consorts, that the 8 consciousnesses or types of consciousness are the 8 bodhisattvas. The 8 types of consciousness are those of the sensory perceptions, like the perception of the eye, the ear, the tongue, the tastes of the body itself, and also the mental consciousness, and then there's also what is known as the all-ground and the all-ground consciousness. Altogether there are 8 of these, and in their purified form there are none other but what is known as the 8 bodhisattvas. So these types of consciousnesses, all together 8 of them, in the ordinary form, appear in the ordinary form as these consciousnesses. If they were purified, they are of the nature of what is known as the 8 close sons, which were the 8 great bodhisattvas who were direct disciples of the victor, of the Buddha himself, and they are such figures as Avalokiteshvara, Vajrapani, Akashagarbha, and so forth. 8 of them altogether. If there are sensory perceptions, of course there are also objects which are being perceived by these sensory perceptions. The eye consciousness deals with all sorts of shapes and forms, the ear consciousness with all sorts of sounds. Similarly for the nose, the tongue, the body, we have objects such as smells, smells or scents, tastes, then all sorts of perceptions in the way of touch. And then there's also the mental consciousness, which constantly, in one way or other, deals with thoughts and ideas either of the past, of the present, or the future. So in this way, there are 8 objects with which these perceptions and the corresponding consciousnesses constantly deal in one way or other. These would appear as such in the impure form. In the pure form, as we're being told by KARMAPA, these, in turn, these 8 objects, the objects which are perceived by the various types of consciousnesses, appear in the pure form as the 8 female bodhisattvas, or the consorts of the 8 aforementioned bodhisattvas. The other night, many of you came together to spend the most part of that night with the accumulation of Dharma just for Rinpoche's long life. Rinpoche says that was indeed a very great, a wonderful endeavor, a wonderful occasion. And such occasions, such endeavors are indeed very beneficial in order to contribute to Rinpoche's long life and the spreading of his activity. So on the other hand, Rinpoche himself says that he continuously prays from the bottom of his heart for that we, his students, may be free of obstacles, that we may have long and prosperous lives, and that we can train ourselves in these long and prosperous lives Dharma practice for the sake of beings. That is Rinpoche's response, so to speak, to our prayers for his long life. One of the most wonderful methods to prolong life is not only to refrain from taking lives, but on the other hand also to ransom life, to make sure that other beings are not being killed in whichever way possible for us. In particular, there might be those who refrain from partaking of foods which can only be produced by way of killing other beings. Of course, we're speaking particularly of meat. So if we were to bring ourselves to avoid the eating of meat, purchasing and eating of meat to the very best of our ability, that in itself would bring about benefit, namely that certain beings would not have to be killed and that their life would be spared, and that would also have a life-prolonging effect, not only upon these, but also upon ourselves. Particularly also in our own monastery, Benchen Monastery in Nepal, but also in other monasteries in the East. Many monasteries have, since several years, decided to refrain from serving meat to the inhabitants of the monastery, particularly with the idea in mind to prolong the lives of all of these great beings which uphold and continuously spread the teaching of the Buddha. First and foremost among them, of course, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama Tenzin Gyatso, and of course the head of our own tradition, who is, as Rinpoche literally says, like the flower that has alighted upon our heads, His Holiness the 17th Karmapa Untitled. And within this wish, within this motivation are included, of course, all the other great masters who follow after these two, who are upholders of the teaching of the Buddha. So that is the general rule in the monastery, in our monastery, and also in several other monasteries. The monastery itself will not serve meat. That's that. Of course, everybody, every monk and every other person associated with the monastery is free to follow that rule in their private life or not. So there are some who, by all means, have completely abandoned the eating of meat. There are others who occasionally like to have their piece of meat, so they, of course, are allowed to go outside to eat meat in a monastery, eat meat in a restaurant. Sorry. I had to mix that up. But the monastery itself will not serve any meat, and that's that. So this rule has, since its inception, been followed. A while ago, Rinpoche himself was in the presence of His Holiness the Karmapa in India, in the Jyoti monastery. He stayed there for exactly 2 months and 5 days, and there is not a shred of meat to be found anywhere. And Rinpoche says he himself felt very happy with this diet. He even didn't miss meat at all. But it had a somewhat detrimental effect upon Rinpoche's health, which at first he didn't notice himself, but eventually it became quite noticeable. Rinpoche lost weight quite considerably. He didn't sleep all that well. Occasionally he felt dizzy, and when Rinpoche eventually returned to the monastery in Nepal, everybody was shocked how much weight he had lost. Together with these effects that he then eventually began to feel himself, Rinpoche then eventually consulted a doctor who strongly prescribed the eating at least of small amounts of meat so that Rinpoche would regain his strength. Because Rinpoche has also, as you all know, to take a whole lot of medicaments in order to keep in good shape. That was simply necessary for his bodily upkeep, and therefore, unfortunately, Rinpoche, for medical reasons, could not wholly abandon the eating of meat, if you should want to. So we have heard that it would be highly beneficial and even life-prolonging activity to not only refrain from killing, refrain from taking the life of others, but also to contribute to the saving of the lives of others. As we commonly know, all sorts of cattle, such as cows or sheep or goats, etc., are constantly in the danger of being slaughtered for their meat in order to be eaten by us. And They constantly, some more, some less consciously, live in that fear. So if we were to save animals of such sorts or others from being killed, from being slaughtered, that would be a very beneficial act, both for them as well as for ourselves. Within the Nyingma tradition, there is even the ritual. There are quite a few of them actually, but we have been handed one of them, a certain ritual, a certain practice that is associated with the, as it is literally called, the ransoming of life. That ritual which we have been handed recently, increasing life and prosperity, that little booklet which we were given a couple of days ago, includes this particular ritual. And this booklet, as so many other practices, or this particular practice here, like all other practices, begins by way of placing ourselves under the protection of the three rare and precious ones, which means to say by going for refuge, and is then followed with the given rise to the enlightened attitude, or bodhicitta as it's commonly called, in order to produce a positive connection for all the beings which this pertains to, so that positive connections would be made. We then proceed to pay homage and obeisance to the Buddha in his various manifestations, or to the various Buddhas for this matter, by way of reciting the corresponding words to the victorious one, the Vasgan, the greatly realized one, the foe destroyer, etc., and so forth, by name of Buddha Amitabha, by name of Buddha such and such. We then continue. We perform prostrations on behalf of these beings, etc. After we have thus, on behalf of beings, performed homage and obeisance, prostrations, etc., naming all of these various Buddhas one after the other, we then proceed with the repetition of the mantras of the Great Compassionate One, Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha Mitrapa or Akshobhya Vajra. This is then followed by the long Dharani of the 11-phased Avalokiteshvara, the same mantra, the same Dharani, which we also find in the Nyung, in the fasting ritual text. The reason why we do this, or the effects of our repeating these mantras in an audible way, is that beings who hear these mantras being repeated by ourselves eventually will form the habit to turn themselves towards the Dharma, to concern themselves with the Dharma in the future. After the repetition of these mantras, we would then imagine the Buddha of boundless life, Matthias, together with all of his retinue, etc., and so forth, to be present in front of ourselves. We would consider them not very different from our root and lineage masters, and we would pray to them from the bottom of the heart that they free beings from the fear of untimely death, that they free them from whatever dangers could bring about such untimely death. Then concluding this short ritual of ransoming life, we would then recite auspicious verses which are arranged around the description of the 6 transcendent virtues, or 6 parameters as they're known. We would then finally end the entire recitation with the repetition of the mantra of the boundless life of Amitayus, and then eventually, of course, conclude with the dedication of merit, and that would conclude this particular life ransoming ritual.
다른 때뭐 손지제 거라는 그 여지 저는 현재 중시 잠깐만요.
Let us now rest a little bit in shamatha meditation, as we do in the morning sessions, and let's focus upon an imagined Buddha in front of ourselves in space. He sits there in all his golden splendor, and we would focus upon his heart center.
Let
us now conclude with the dedication of whatever merit we have accumulated for the sake of being.